On a quiet street, a scene unfolded that no one could have predicted. A ruthless biker, known for his violent tendencies and disregard for others, roamed the neighborhood looking for trouble. But little did he know, today, his reckless actions would come back to haunt him in a way he never imagined. As he sped down the street, he saw a dog sitting innocently by the sidewalk. Without warning, the biker kicked the dog, laughing as he caused the poor animal pain. But there was one shocking twist. The dog wasn't just any ordinary pet. It belonged to none other than Keanu Reeves, the Hollywood superstar known for his kindness and love for animals. Imagine the biker's surprise when he learned who the dog's owner was. Keanu Reeves, an icon in the entertainment world, was not only a lover of animals, but a man with a reputation for standing up for what's right. The biker, thinking he could get away with such an act, had no idea that he had just picked a fight with someone who would not let this slide. What happened next would send shockwaves through the internet and leave people questioning what it means to stand up for the things you love. Keanu's reaction to the situation wasn't one of anger or outrage. Instead, it was a calm, calculated response that would teach the biker a lesson he would never forget. But the story didn't end there. Keanu's connection to the dog wasn't just about love, it was about something far deeper. His decision to take action revealed a side of him that most people never see, and it showed just how far he was willing to go to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. In the coming moments, the biker would realize that what seemed like a harmless act of cruelty would soon turn into a nightmare. But would the biker face any consequences for his actions? Would Keanu's intervention be enough to teach him a lesson, or was there something even more intense brewing behind the scenes? The biker's day was about to take an unexpected and unforgettable turn, one that would not only affect him, but also change the way we think about standing up for what's right. Stay tuned as we dive deeper into this jaw-dropping encounter and find out how Keanu Reeves turned the tables on the ruthless biker. What happens next? You won't believe it. As the biker strutted away from the scene, his laughter echoing down the street, he had no idea that his actions would soon come back to haunt him. To him, it was just a quick moment of amusement, something to fuel his rebellious attitude. The dog's whimpering had barely registered in his mind as he revved his engine, leaving the poor animal behind. But the dog wasn't just any random stray. Keanu had raised her from a pup, and she was more than just a pet to him. She was family. Keanu's love for animals was well known in Hollywood, but few knew the depth of his connection to them. He had always been someone who stood up for the voiceless, whether it was on screen, in public, or in his private life. He had spent years rescuing animals, including dogs, cats, and even horses, and he never hesitated to lend a hand when someone or something needed protection. His kindness extended beyond just words. It was seen in the countless charity events he supported, his donations, and the personal sacrifices he made to ensure the well-being of animals in need. When Keanu found out what had happened to his dog, he was devastated, but there was something else simmering inside him, something far stronger than anger. It was the need for justice, not just for his pet, but for the countless animals who didn't have someone to stand up for them. And this wasn't going to be a simple matter of confronting the biker and letting it go. Keanu had a different plan in mind. The biker, oblivious to the storm he had stirred, was unaware of the ripple effect his actions had set into motion. He didn't know that Keanu was already taking steps to track him down, and he certainly didn't know about the network of people Keanu had behind him, all united in their love for animals and their desire to protect them. Keanu was not one to make threats. He preferred to take action quietly but decisively. Soon, the biker would learn that this wasn't going to be a typical encounter. Back at his home, Keanu spent the next few hours reviewing footage from his security cameras. The biker's face was clear, and Keanu had already contacted a few of his trusted friends who were experts in tracking down individuals through minimal information. He wasn't just angry. He was determined to make sure the biker understood the gravity of what he'd done. This wasn't just about getting the biker to apologize. This was about making sure no one would think they could harm an innocent creature without facing consequences. The suspense was building. Keanu's quiet demeanor might have made it seem like he was letting the situation go, but behind his calm exterior was a plan in motion. He knew the biker wouldn't be easy to find, but Keanu's reputation for perseverance and resolve was legendary. As the day turned into night, Keanu's resolve grew stronger. The biker's carefree attitude would soon be shattered, and the consequences of his actions would be felt far beyond that one moment of cruelty. But what would Keanu do once he found him? What consequences would the biker face? Keanu wasn't the type to lash out without reason, but he also wasn't someone who would let this go without making a statement. The biker might have thought his actions were trivial, but Keanu was about to show him just how serious he was about defending the innocent. And when the confrontation finally came, it would be a moment neither of them would ever forget. The next few days passed in a blur for the biker. At first, he didn't think much about the dog he kicked. After all, animals were just animals in his mind, nothing that deserved any real consideration. He spent his time riding, drinking with his gang, and living life the way he always had, reckless and without a care in the world. But there was a nagging feeling, something at the back of his mind, that he couldn't shake. The memory of the dog's frightened eyes kept creeping up on him, and for some reason it began to bother him. Maybe it was the fact that he hadn't expected anyone to stand up for the dog. It wasn't until the first threat came that he truly understood how serious things had become. One evening, as the biker sat in his favorite bar, a mysterious text message arrived on his phone. The message was short and cryptic. "You hurt one of ours. You'll pay the price." At first, he shrugged it off as a prank, maybe someone just trying to mess with him. But when the second message came, he could no longer ignore it. It was a picture of the dog, unharmed, but with the words, "We're watching." Panic began to set in. He couldn't help but wonder who was behind this, who knew about his brutal action and had the resources to track him down. Meanwhile, Keanu was relentlessly pursuing the biker. He knew the biker would be hard to catch, but he had never been one to back down. It wasn't just about the dog. It was about making a statement. Keanu's team had already identified the biker's gang affiliation, and they had started gathering information on his whereabouts and patterns. But Keanu was determined to handle this personally. His quiet resolve was becoming a force to be reckoned with. He was following the trail, and every step was bringing him closer to the biker, to a confrontation that would change everything. At the same time, the biker's gang members began to notice his sudden paranoia. They had known him as a brash, fearless leader, but now they saw a man beginning to crack under the pressure. Whispers started circulating about what he had done to the dog and the mysterious messages that kept arriving. The biker's reputation, built on fear and intimidation, was starting to slip. The gang was no longer sure of his strength or leadership, and some began to question whether they should stand by him if things escalated further. But the biker didn't know who was behind the threats, and that uncertainty gnawed at him. Was it just some animal rights group trying to get revenge, or was it something far more personal? He couldn't shake the image of the calm man who owned the dog. Keanu Reeves wasn't a man to be underestimated, and the biker started to realize he had unwittingly stepped into something far beyond his control. The biker's bravado began to falter, replaced by the fear that he might have angered someone capable of much more than simple retribution. As Keanu moved closer to confronting him, the biker made a decision. He had to get out of town, lay low, and figure out how to handle this situation before it went too far. But what he didn't know was that Keanu was already ahead of him. The chase had already begun, and there was no escape from the inevitable confrontation. Both men, caught in a battle of nerves and willpower, were about to meet in a way neither expected. The dog's fate had started a chain of events, and the consequences of the biker's cruelty were only just beginning to unfold. The tension was thick, and neither side was ready to back down. What would happen when their paths finally crossed? Would the biker survive this unexpected storm, or would Keanu's pursuit change the course of his life forever? The stakes were higher than either man could have imagined, and the clock was ticking. The biker's anxiety had reached a breaking point. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was always watching him. The messages kept coming, growing more intense with each one. "You're not getting away with this. We know where you are." With every text, the biker's paranoia deepened. The laughter and bravado he had once worn like armor now felt hollow, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. His gang members had started pulling away, murmuring about finding their own way out before things got any worse. The biker had gone from feared leader to a man on the run, desperate to hide from a threat he couldn't understand. Meanwhile, Keanu's pursuit of the biker had reached a fever pitch. He wasn't just determined anymore, he was consumed by it. The calm, stoic actor known for his humility was now a force of nature, moving through the shadows and using his vast network to track the biker's every move. He was more than just a man seeking justice. Keanu had become a symbol of resolve, of doing whatever it took to make things right. His calm demeanor hid the fury that burned inside him, knowing that the biker had caused unnecessary pain, and worse yet, had no idea who he was truly dealing with. Keanu was close, too close. He knew the biker had planned to skip town, likely to lay low somewhere far away, but Keanu had anticipated that. Through his connections, he had already pinpointed the biker's location. There was no running now. The moment was nearing when everything would collide. The biker's fear, Keanu's wrath, and the truth of the situation would all come to a head. But the biker wasn't ready to go down without a fight. He had made plans of his own, reaching out to some of his more dangerous associates for backup. If he couldn't escape, he'd make sure Keanu didn't get what he wanted. He was ready to face whatever came his way, even if it meant going down in a blaze of defiance. Yet, in his heart, a flicker of doubt lingered. Was this really just about the dog? Or was Keanu's involvement something far deeper, a personal vendetta he couldn't understand? No matter how hard he tried to make sense of it, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had bitten off more than he could chew. As the days ticked by, the tension between them built like a pressure cooker about to explode. Keanu had one final encounter to prepare for, a meeting where he would finally face the man who had dared to harm an innocent animal. His team had closed in on the biker's hideout, and everything was set for the showdown. But Keanu had one final question weighing on him. Was he willing to go as far as it would take to make the biker truly understand the consequences of his actions? The biker, for all his tough talk, couldn't stop his mind from racing. The texts had stopped, the silence eerily deafening. Had Keanu given up? Or was the calm before the storm more dangerous than anything that had come before? He knew the time for running was over. The final encounter was inevitable, and it was drawing nearer with every passing moment. Neither man knew exactly how this would end, but one thing was certain: when they finally came face to face, nothing would be the same. The question was no longer about who would come out on top. It was about what was going to happen to them both. Would Keanu's relentless pursuit lead to the biker's downfall, or would it only ignite a dangerous chain of events neither could control? The pieces were falling into place, the tension mounting, and the audience could feel it. The final confrontation was just around the corner, and with it, the truth of what would unfold next. Would justice prevail, or would the biker's brutality spiral out of control, pushing both men into uncharted territory? The clock was ticking, and the stage was set for a clash neither of them could have predicted. As Keanu prepared for the final confrontation, a sudden twist threw everything into chaos. Just when he thought the moment of reckoning was near, something unexpected happened. An anonymous message arrived on his phone. The message was simple but chilling. "The biker's not your real target." Keanu's heart skipped a beat. It made no sense. All this time, he had been focused on the biker, on making him understand the gravity of his actions, but now there was someone, or something, else lurking in the shadows. The message was followed by a series of photos, unsettling images of Keanu's own home, taken from various angles. It was clear someone had been watching him for days. His every move had been observed, and now the stakes were higher than ever. Not only was he on the trail of the biker, but he had inadvertently walked straight into a much bigger web of deceit, a conspiracy that stretched further than he could have imagined. The biker, the gang, and the cruelty toward the dog were just pieces of a far larger puzzle that Keanu hadn't even begun to understand. The revelation hit Keanu hard. He realized the biker was just a pawn in a much darker game, and his pursuit of justice for the dog had led him right into the heart of something more dangerous than he could have ever predicted. Whoever was behind these cryptic messages had been manipulating the entire situation from the start. The biker was just an instrument, a person chosen because of his recklessness and disregard for life, but the real force pulling the strings remained hidden. Meanwhile, the biker, still holed up in his hideout, began to unravel in his own way. He had been preparing for the worst, expecting Keanu's wrath, but now, with everything falling apart around him, he started to realize the truth. The messages, the threats, they weren't just about the dog. Someone else had orchestrated everything from the shadows, using him as a tool to ignite a chain of events that would lead to something far worse. The fear that had once been centered around Keanu was now replaced with a creeping dread of a much greater power at play. The biker had no choice but to act. He had to survive, to figure out who was really behind all of this before he became the next victim in a much larger scheme. His gang members, already wavering in their loyalty, began to pull away even further as they caught wind of the strange developments. No one knew who to trust anymore, and everyone feared the unknown force that was manipulating them all. As Keanu realized he had been played, his calm, controlled nature began to give way to a rising sense of urgency. He needed answers. He needed to know who had set all of this in motion and why. The mystery of the second threat, one that now seemed far more personal than he had originally thought, had taken hold of him. Keanu could no longer just think about the biker or the dog. He had to outwit this new, unseen enemy, but to do so, he would have to confront an even deeper layer of darkness, one that was determined to control everything in its path. Keanu and the biker, now both caught in the grasp of a larger conspiracy, were about to collide in ways neither had anticipated. The moment of truth was coming, but not in the way either man had imagined. The tension between them would soon seem insignificant compared to the larger forces that were closing in on both of them, and the world they thought they understood was about to be turned upside down. Would Keanu uncover the truth before it was too late? Would the biker become a reluctant ally, or was he still just a pawn in a game too big for either of them to comprehend? With every passing second, the stakes grew higher, and the clock was ticking down to a final explosive revelation. The night had finally arrived. Keanu stood in the shadows of an abandoned warehouse, the air thick with tension. His mind was racing, trying to piece together the puzzle that had spiraled out of control. He had tracked the biker to this location, but he knew now that the biker wasn't the real threat. Whoever had sent the cryptic messages, whoever had orchestrated this whole chain of events, was still out there. Keanu had prepared for a confrontation, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something much bigger at play. The biker, too, had arrived at the warehouse, nervous and unsure of what awaited him. His hands trembled as he reached for his phone, trying to make sense of the chaos that had overtaken his life. The messages had stopped, but the silence only made the fear grow louder. He had no choice now but to face Keanu. He had no idea what the actor wanted from him, but the thought of the man who could turn his world upside down terrified him. Keanu stepped out of the shadows, his figure silhouetted against the dim light. The biker froze, his breath catching in his throat. It wasn't anger in Keanu's eyes. It wasn't revenge. There was something deeper, something colder in his gaze, as if he had already moved past the biker and was now focused on the bigger picture. The biker swallowed hard, unsure if he was about to face Keanu's wrath or if this encounter was just the beginning of something even more dangerous. Who's really behind this? Keanu's voice was calm, controlled, but it carried a weight that made the biker feel as if the ground beneath him was shifting. The biker didn't answer at first, confusion written all over his face. Keanu wasn't just after an apology or a confrontation anymore. He was after the truth. Before the biker could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed in the distance. Someone else was coming. Keanu's body tensed, every sense on high alert, And then the unexpected happened. A group of men, dressed in suits, emerged from the shadows. Their leader was someone Keanu had never expected to see, someone who had been hiding in plain sight all along. It was a former associate of Keanu's, a person from his past he thought he had left behind long ago. This man, who had once worked alongside Keanu to rescue animals from illegal trafficking rings, had turned rogue, using Keanu's own network to manipulate events for his own gain. "I didn't think it would come to this," the man said with a smirk, his voice dripping with arrogance. "But you have to know, Keanu, it was never about the dog. It was about you. You were always too trusting, too naive to see the bigger game. I needed you distracted, so I set the biker up, made you believe it was personal, but you were always the real target." Keanu's jaw clenched as the realization hit him. All of this, the messages, the threats, the chase, it had all been a smokescreen. The man in front of him had used the biker, used the dog, to draw Keanu into a trap. And now, with the truth exposed, it was too late to turn back. The biker, still confused, looked between Keanu and the man in the suit, his mind struggling to catch up with the truth. He had been nothing more than a pawn, a tool in a game that had never been about him. His role had been simple: provoke Keanu, get his attention, and push him into a corner where he would become part of a much larger scheme. "You were never meant to survive this," the man continued, stepping closer. "You both were distractions. Keanu, you were always too powerful for your own good. Too many people loved you, respected you. I needed to take you down, one way or another." But before Keanu could respond, the biker made a choice. In a flash of desperation, he lunged forward, knocking the man in the suit to the ground. The biker had no loyalty to the man who had used him, and for the first time in this twisted story, he realized he had a chance to escape the web that had ensnared him. The chaos that followed was brief but intense, a blur of movement, shouting, and confusion as Keanu took control of the situation, disarming the man and forcing him to his knees. Just as it seemed the chaos had settled, another twist emerged. The man in the suit reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device, pressing it to his chest. Keanu's eyes widened in realization. It was a bomb, and it was set to go off in mere seconds. In a split second, Keanu made a choice. He dove at the man, wresting the device from his hands, narrowly avoiding the explosion as it went off with a deafening blast. The shockwave sent Keanu sprawling across the floor, dazed but alive. When the dust settled, the biker was gone, disappearing into the night, likely to run from the mess he had just barely escaped. And Keanu? He was left standing in the wreckage, breathing heavily, the weight of the truth still settling over him. The dog was safe, but the real battle had only just begun. The man who had once been his ally was gone, and the conspiracy had been revealed, but the fight for justice was far from over. Keanu knew the world he once trusted was now more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. The truth was out there, but the real enemy, the one pulling the strings, had only just begun to make his move. And Keanu was now more determined than ever to stop him, no matter the cost. As the dust from the explosion settled, Keanu's heart was still racing. The immediate danger had passed, but the weight of everything that had just unfolded felt heavier than ever. He slowly stood up, his body bruised but alive, his mind working through the chaos. The biker, the man in the suit, and the mystery that had pulled him into this twisted web, they were all gone, but the answers Keanu needed were still out of reach. He glanced around the wreckage of the warehouse, his eyes scanning for any sign of the man who had masterminded it all. There was no one left to fight, no one left to pursue, and yet the war wasn't over. Keanu knew the world had changed, but the conspiracy he had stumbled upon was just the beginning. He had been a pawn in someone else's game, but now, with the explosion behind him and the wreckage scattered around him, Keanu was no longer just a man looking for justice for a dog. He was now a symbol of defiance, a person who had survived an attempt on his life and uncovered a dark conspiracy far greater than anything he could have imagined. And while the truth about the mastermind remained elusive, Keanu was determined to uncover it, piece by piece. Back in the city, life was slowly returning to normal. The dog, whom Keanu had rescued from the cruel hands of the biker, had recovered from the trauma, finding peace in Keanu's home. It wasn't just a victory for the dog, it was a reminder that sometimes, even in the darkest of moments, there was light. Keanu had been able to protect what mattered most, but it was clear that the shadows were not yet behind him. His pursuit of justice had led him down a dangerous path, one that had shaken him to his core, and the realization that the forces at play were far more insidious than he had ever imagined left him unsettled. The biker, for all his flaws, had escaped, his life still hanging in the balance, his fate uncertain. He had been a tool in a much larger scheme, and while Keanu had confronted the person who had used him, there was still the lingering question of what the biker's future would hold. Would he continue down his path of violence and chaos, or would he have the chance to turn things around? Keanu couldn't help but wonder if, somewhere down the line, their paths would cross again. The final messages from the man in the suit had been clear. This isn't over. Keanu knew that, even though the immediate danger had passed, the larger battle was far from finished. The mysterious mastermind had slipped away, but Keanu wasn't about to give up. He had seen the lengths people would go to for power, and now he was more determined than ever to expose the truth, no matter the cost. The dog's rescue had only been the beginning. What lay ahead would be far more dangerous and complicated than anything he had faced so far. As Keanu sat in his quiet home, the dog lying peacefully by his side, he couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought him here. The path had been full of twists and turns, moments of fear and uncertainty, but it had also shown him the strength of his resolve. In the end, it wasn't just about stopping the biker or solving the mystery. It was about standing up for what was right, no matter how difficult or dangerous the road ahead might be. The story had come to a close for now, but the fight was far from over. Keanu knew that, and though the shadows still lingered, he was ready to face whatever came next. And as he looked down at the dog that had started it all, Keanu felt a sense of peace wash over him. Justice had been served, but the true battle was just beginning.